It's our great pleasure at the National Atomic Testing Museum to introduce our new traveling exhibit, or temporary exhibit, which is titled Operation Crossroads, Bikini Atoll Collection. And we thank the United States Heritage and History Command for the loan of most of the works that make up the collection. Now we have a real treat today because we have the son of famed artist, United States Navy artist Arthur Beaumont, Mr. Geoffrey Beaumont, who has tirelessly documented the history of his father's important work and his contributions to the United States Navy and the history. And he's going to give us a little guided tour of this collection today so that you can all understand the significance of these marvelous paintings.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward, I take with great pride in the collection of paintings you've assembled here, which is from the Navy collection in Washington, D.C. Admiral Sam Cox, who is the commander of the Navy Heritage and History Command, was kind enough to send these paintings to us. These paintings originally were shown at the National Gallery of Art in 1946 in October, and the show opened on Navy Day 1946, which is October 27th. It then went to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, where over 600,000 people saw the exhibit. It was quite extraordinary because these were the first paintings recording the entry into the atomic age.
As the museum director, I want to give you a great deal of credit because you have helped and assisted us so much in facilitating the loan of these paintings. So we owe you a great gratitude here because you are the reason, in part, that this exhibit is here today to the public and the people of Las Vegas.
Well, it's a great pleasure to do that.
Thank you.
I thought I would start out by giving you a little history of how my father, Arthur Beaumont, came to be appointed as the official artist for the Operation Task Force 1, Operations Crossroad. It goes back to the early 1930s. In 1932, my father was director of art publications for UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. And in 1932, it was announced that UCLA would be a sponsor of the 1932 Olympics. So my father did the Olympic posters for 1932, and that was the only assignment he had that year because it was during the Depression, the worst years of the Depression. The same year, he met Captain Percy Foote on board the battleship Arkansas. And Captain Foote was an art collector, and he also introduced my dad to Admiral William Leahy. And that became significant because Admiral Leahy, in later years, would become the highest-ranking officer in World War II and the first fleet admiral, five-star admiral of the U.S. Navy. So in 1932, my father did a portrait of Admiral Leahy in Long Beach when he was commander of cruisers and destroyers. And during that sitting for the portrait, Admiral Leahy said to my dad, and he was called Beau, my father's nickname was Beau. He said, "Beau, have you thought about being the artist for the Navy?" And my dad was quite surprised by that. He said, "No, I've never thought of that." Well, Admiral Leahy said, "I think you should be the artist of the fleet." So in the next few months, he got an appointment of my dad to be a lieutenant in the Navy Reserve. And in 1933, he became the official artist of the fleet. And he went to sea with the Navy for 2 years, 1933 and 1934, and he painted virtually every capital ship in the Navy. That included all the ships that were sunk at Pearl Harbor in later years. So now we get to after the war. The Navy, most people in the Navy did not know about the atomic bomb. It was one of the greatest secrets that the United States had, probably the greatest secret of World War II. And primarily scientists were involved with the bomb, not military people, line military people. So the Navy was quite shocked at the destruction that it saw at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and realized that it had implications that could be a threat to the fleet. So immediately, Lewis Strauss wrote a letter to the Admiral Nimitz, who is now Chief of Naval Operations, and indicated that it would be important to have a test to find out what the destructive capability of the bomb is vis-a-vis the ships of the fleet. That was the genesis of the idea for doing the atomic bomb tests in Operations Crossroads. So it went up the chain of command in a very short period of time. There was a bitter inter-service rivalry going on between the Army Air Corps and the Navy. The Army Air Corps was saying the Navy is now obsolete, and all the appropriations should go to the Army and to the Air Force. The Navy wasn't going to have that, and it developed a strategy that it would develop strategic bombing capabilities off the aircraft carriers, and it would also enhance the submarine program. That ultimately led to the nuclear submarine program. So the Navy decided to have these tests to see what the danger was to the existing fleet, and they assembled what they call the guinea pig fleet, which was the old ships of the United States Navy, plus a few of the ships from the Japanese Navy, and one ship, the Prince Eugen, one of the few survivors of the German Navy. And they were brought together in the Marshall Islands at Bikini Island, Bikini Atoll, for this test. And the test was to be a very thorough test with one bomb dropped from above. It would be dropped by the Air Force, and one underwater bomb. They called the Able bomb and the Baker bomb. So Beau was appointed task force artist by Admiral Leahy, supported by Admiral Nimitz, and introduced to Admiral Spike Blandy, who was in charge of Task Force 1. He was given the highest priority for his travel arrangements, and he flew first from Hawaii to Kwajalein Island in the Marshall Islands, where he stayed with Commodore Ben Wyatt. Commodore Wyatt was the governor of the Marshall Islands, a protectorate of the United States after World War II. Marshall Islands previously, before World War I, had been a protectorate of the German nation, and during World War II, it was occupied by the Japanese. So when the Americans came in and took over as the protectors of the island, the Bikinese natives, of which there were 167 on Bikini Atoll, were very pleased and were very sympathetic because they were being given good food and supplies and being well taken care of from a medical point of view. So Beau flew to Kwajalein, met with Commodore Ben Wyatt, and Ben Wyatt was telling the story of how it was his task to talk to King Judah of the Bikinese Islands and to ask him to voluntarily leave the islands. It was a delicate political mission, but in the end it succeeded, and King Judah led his people off the island so that the tests could be conducted. They thought at the time that they would be able to come back fairly soon after the tests. That proved to be a mistake because the radioactivity continued on for many years. So in 1946, the tests were scheduled the first bomb was going to be July 1st, 1946, and it was to be dropped by a B-29 over the fleet. The Bikini Pig fleet had been assembled, 70 or 80 ships. The principal target was the USS Nevada, the battleship Nevada, and it was painted red by the Navy so that the Air Force could easily detect which was the target they were supposed to hit. The first bomb would be dropped from about 30,000 feet, and in the end, the mushroom cloud would actually exceed that, probably going in excess of 40,000 feet after the bomb ignited. So there were two artists at Bikini, not just my dad, but Captain Charles Bittinger. Captain Bittinger, also appointed by Admiral Leahy. They were roommates, and they were roommates aboard the flagship USS Fall River, which was Admiral Farallon's flagship, and that was the ship that would be closest to the bombs so they could best observe them close up. Captain Bittinger was an artist who painted in oil, whereas Beau painted primarily in watercolor. We have in the corner here the original paintings of Captain Bittinger. And in this beautiful array, these oil paintings, we have 8 or 9 of them. The first on the left represent the Able bomb dropped from the air. And Captain Bittinger was interested primarily in the shape and colors of the mushroom cloud itself, and less so about the ships. You can see down below, you could hardly see the ships. Now, Beau, on the other hand, he was the ship guy. He was the official artist for the Navy. You're going to see ships on all of his paintings as being the center of prominence. So here you have these 4 paintings of the Able bomb by Captain Bittinger. And on the right, you have the Baker bomb. This is the underwater bomb. So this is the earliest image here. We had this bubble that appeared, followed by the column that rose, and then the column that collapsed. As this column collapsed, it contained very high levels of radioactivity, and it created a tidal wave that at one point in time was 97 feet high, but it dissipated very rapidly. It was estimated that the carrier Saratoga, which was one of the closest to the column, was lifted out of the water by about 80 feet. Later on, also at Bikini Island, it was shown that the tidal wave, which had been much smaller by the time it got to the island, had also caused the cemetery to be in disarray. So here you have the Abel bomb and the Baker bomb. And now we'll move on to show the Arthur Beaumont paintings, which tell about the arrangements of the ships and the damage that the ships experienced. So I'd like to begin with this painting first. This is a painting that was done plein air, on the spot, by Beau. And you'll see the battleship Nevada in the center, painted bright red. Now these other ships that are around it are the Guinea Pig fleet, and these ships were both old ships of the Navy, the foreign navies, but also some newer ships because they wanted to see what the effect would be on more up-to-date ships. So it's a combination. These ships were not this close together. Beau was a member of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and Naval Intelligence did not want these ships to show the amount of damage in the distance from the bomb itself. So these are foreshortened, and the ships are brought much closer together than they actually existed. You can see in the Bittinger paintings, they're spread out over miles. But they are in the correct positions, but the spatial relationships have been distorted for security reasons. So this is the first painting that was done. And then there are a series of other paintings done prior to the bomb being exploded. Up here you have a dry dock, you have the Nevada, and you have the cruiser Pensacola in the background. You could then go to the bomb painting. This is the second bomb. And these are watercolors. And this is on loan to us from the Jonathan Art Foundation in Los Angeles. And it shows the Fall River in the foreground, which is the ship where my dad was located on, and the bomb itself. This is the second bomb. During this test, he had to make a decision. Do I wear dark goggles, or do I cover my eyes and then look at the color? He chose not to wear the goggles because he thought it would distort the color, and he wanted to see them unabated. So he waited for the white of the flash of the ignition of the bomb to fade, and then he looked and did his drawings immediately from observation. And he always claimed that his paintings had the true color of the bomb, whereas the photography, all the light meters shut down because of the intensity of the white flash, and they lost the color. So most of the official photographs of these bombs are in black and white, not in color. This is a painting of the battleship Nevada after the first bomb, after the Abel bomb. And you can see that there is a ship, a Japanese cruiser, sinking in the foreground. I think it's Sakawa. You can see in the background is the Japanese battleship Nagato. The Nagato was the flagship of the fleet that Yamamoto sent to attack Pearl Harbor in the Pearl Harbor attacks. Later on, after the second bomb, the Nagato also sank. And arrayed around it are a series of drone boats that are going through to measure the radioactivity of the area. Now, in the process of doing these paintings, Beau became overexposed to radiation, but he was treated on the spot, and he was treated successfully, and he lived to be 88 years old and did not contract cancer. But there was a risk, and many other people were less fortunate. Over here you have the battleship Nagato, and in this case, it shows heavy damage from the bomb that was dropped from the air. In the background is the Nevada that shows some damage, but the Air Force never admitted that they missed the target. In fact, it landed about a half a mile away and sank one ship that had instrumentation aboard, and so they lost some of the capability of monitoring what was going on when that ship sank. The Nagato sank after the second bomb, as did the Saratoga. So these are the first assemblies of the before and after of the bomb. These are the original working drawings that Beau did during the atomic bomb ignition. These three drawings here are the first images done by an artist of the atomic bomb. As he's witnessing it, he's blocked off the paper to show quadrants, and he has a navigator standing next to him. The navigator has a sextant, and he's measuring the height of the cloud every 5 seconds. As these drawings are done, they're recording not only the images, but the time of the images. And these became the essence of the shape of the bomb, the shape of the cloud of the bomb. Below, you also have his working drawings showing, this is the superstructure of the battleship Nagato. Below here is this is a final drawing of the aircraft carrier Saratoga. This is the carrier Independence after the first bomb, showing damage on it. And this is a pre-bomb drawing that shows the fleet in the position of the ships, although the spatial relationships between them continue to be distorted. From these drawings, he would then go to his cabin, and at night he would do the paintings. Some paintings he did on the spot. As we saw in the first group, he's on a boat and he does the paintings right there. But the refined paintings are primarily done in the cabin each evening. Admiral Ferrion made a point of inspecting the paintings because they were the first images he was able to get before he received the photographs, which took a while to develop. We have here an assembly of a series of paintings that were done both before and after the bomb. This painting here is a plein air drawing that was done in his cabin that evening after he did his sketches. This is the USS New York. It's a battleship, and it shows the guns trained as they're testing the ship for its operational capabilities, and it is done prior to the dropping of the Able bomb. The other 3 paintings here are done after the Able blast. This is a battleship Arkansas. The Arkansas has a particular history with my dad because it was the first ship he went to sail on in the Navy in 1932 with Captain Percy Foote. He was the last person to leave this ship in 1946 before it was sunk. This ship survived the first bomb, but it was enveloped in the column of water in the second bomb and disappeared. Above, we have ships that have been damaged by the first bomb. This is the Arkansas, as I said. This is the Pensacola, a cruiser. It is listing heavily to port. And this is the USS Skate, which is a submarine that survived the blast. It was on the surface at the time of the Able blast. And you can see the superstructure was significantly damaged. But the crew realized that the pressure hull had not been violated, and the ship could still be operated. So they were very proud the day after the Able blast to parade their ship in front of the flagship at Admiral Spike Blandy to show that their ship was still operational, although they were ignoring the fact that it was highly radioactive, something that would come to haunt them later on. So these ships show the before and after of the Able blast. These 2 paintings are particularly interesting because they show the effects of the bomb directly on the ships. The top painting here is the USS Independence. It's a light carrier, and it was it was close to the place where the first bomb, the Able bomb, landed. So it was not the target ship, but it turned to take was damaged more than most of the other ships. It burned for several days, and it was significantly injured. This painting itself was done from a boat on the spot. Below, you have a very dramatic rendering of the USS Saratoga. Now, this is after the second blast, which had lifted the ship out of the water and damaged it structurally, and it sank 7 hours after the Baker blast. But the Saratoga here, you can see it's listing, it's about to sink, and you can see the planes are falling off the deck into the water. Very dramatic presentation. So you have the Able bomb and the Baker bomb. I wanted to take a moment to talk about King Judah, because King Judah was the person who made the decision to lead his 164 family members, occupants of the island of Bikini, to another island, Rongerik, some 200 miles away. My dad did a portrait of King Judah, and the portrait is contained in the book that I wrote, The Art of the Sea, which is a biography of my dad. We don't have the original painting here, but we do have an image taken from the book. So this is King Judah and it was taken as he was inspecting the cemetery on the island just before the first bomb was dropped. Below, we also have original drawings that were done of the island of Bikini. Now, these are sketches that were done actually on the spot, plein air sketches. These are they're rather crude, they're rather rough, but they record the scene as he saw it. Here you have a group of sailors on the beach, scientists in the background, and you have over here the cemetery of the Royal Cemetery of the former kings of Bikini. Beau did a series of paintings of the island, which also included this painting here. This painting one is after the bomb, after the tidal wave hit the island from the Baker bomb. And these two paintings here, which was, that's one of the command shacks with the American flag flying, and a picture of the Officers Club, and there's quite a story that goes with that as well. He also did original drawings on the spot of the island of Bikini. One of the more humorous stories about Beau at Bikini relates to the fact that he claimed to be the inventor of the bikini bathing suit. The Navy up to that point in time had issued to its sailors bathing suits that were one-piece bathing suits. Now at Bikini there were 42,000 men, mostly Navy, and there were 37 women. All 37 of them were commissioned officers and were nurses on the ships designed to monitor the radiation amongst the participants of the tests. So the Navy had changed its regulations to allow two-piece bathing suits for the nurses, and Beau encouraged the nurses to design their own bathing suits, and which they did, and then he painted the bathing suit. So here we have a painting of the Officers Club on Bikini, and walking down the aisle here in the center is a nurse with a two-piece red bathing suit. Beau claimed that this was the first bikini bathing suit to exist. Now, about the same time, shortly after the bomb tests, there were two designers in Paris who designed the atomic bathing suit. You saw some posters that showed a picture of a woman in a two-piece bathing suit, much more scant than this one. And that was the original French bikini bathing suit, which would be popularized some years later by Brigitte Bardot as she wore the two-piece thong bathing suits. So at that time, the Catholic Church ruled that the bikini bathing suits was obscene and should not be worn by any participants. That didn't last for very long, and the bikini bathing suit became a mainstay of American and European fashion. But this is a picture of the first bikini bathing suit. I wanted to take a moment to talk about my dad's naval paintings other than those that were done at Bikini. He was the official artist for the Navy for nearly 47 years, and during those years he painted most of the capital ships of the Navy. Overall, he painted approximately 1,200 paintings, of which about 1,000 paintings were fine studio works of Navy ships, mostly ship portraiture. Those today are in most of the Navy collections throughout the country and in many private collections. We have here a private collection by the collector John Gibson. John served in the Navy on board a nuclear submarine, and he had a great affinity towards collecting the paintings of my dad. These are ship portraits done over a period of time. This would have been done around the time of World War II. This is a black and white painting. This is a lithograph that was done for the Hearst Syndicate of Newspapers. My dad was the chief illustrator for William Randolph Hearst from 1939 to 1941, before Pearl Harbor. And as the news stories came in from Europe, they had no images to go with it. So he would read the story, envision an image, it would then do a lithograph, or he'd do an ink painting, and those paintings would be photographed, and they would appear with the story on the front page of the Hearst Syndicate of Newspapers across the United States. So here's a battle scene involving a British battleship in a battle with the Germans. This is another wartime painting. This is a submarine attacking a merchant ship, a Japanese merchantman. And you can see there's a destroyer in the background. You can see here the gun crews have got the guns trained on the ship, and the ship is burning because it didn't surrender right away. Seaplanes in the air, destroyer in the background. Great battle scene from 1945. This is an older work, and this work is, again, it's an ink painting, and it was done for Navy Day. These would appear celebrating the anniversary, the birthday of the Navy, which is October 27th each year. This again would appear on the front page of the newspaper. Here are pictures of much later in time. These are in the 1960s, 1970s. This is the nuclear submarine Scamp. John Gibson, the collector of this collection, served on this ship, and he was particularly enamored to find not only a finished drawing of the Scamp, but also a finished painting of the Scamp, quite rare. My dad didn't care for submarines all that much because he felt they were rather boring. It didn't have the characteristics that he liked to see in other ships. So he would often surround them with a harbor scene to make it visually more interesting. So this is the USS Scamp, which is number 588. I want to spend a moment and talk about this painting. This is one of the most historically significant paintings that I think my father ever painted. This is the only painting that I know of that was classified by the Navy as top secret. And it represents a painting of the Jimmy Doolittle bombing of Tokyo. If you may recall, Pearl Harbor was in December of 1941, but in April of 1942, Jimmy Doolittle, an Army flyer, figured out a way to launch B-25 bombers from an American aircraft carrier to bomb Tokyo, and then they did not have enough fuel to return to the carriers. And you couldn't land on the carriers anyway because the planes were too large to land. They could only take off and just barely take off. So this painting is of the carrier Hornet. The Hornet is launching its raid on Tokyo. But my dad was also a member of the Office of Naval Intelligence, and the Navy did not want anyone who saw this painting to realize what type of ship launched the attack, nor what kind of planes were used. So both the ship and the planes are both historically inaccurate. This is, in fact, a later model of an Essex-class carrier, those that were under construction at the time of the raid, but not yet in service. And the planes being launched are Navy planes rather than the Army planes that actually fulfilled the mission. So this painting is one of the most important paintings I think my father ever did. And you can see the detail of it. It's very refined. It's a studio work, and it was done in 1942 and classified secret. So to conclude the John Gibson collection, I wanted to show you a series of working drawings and final paintings that were done ship portraiture. This is a drawing that was done on board the ship. You can see the officers of the deck, and the guns are being trained. And this is a gun exercise off of Culebra. So that's a working drawing. This is another working drawing of the USS Helena. The Helena was the flagship of the 7th Fleet at one time, along with the St. Paul. And in 1947, Beau went with Admiral Delaney to visit Japan and on to mainland China. He was in China during the Civil War when the Chinese communists were attacking the country. So these are ship portraits from the period just after the war. This is 1947. And this is a painting that was done in China. You'll notice the colorations of it. This is the Helena again, showing the homeward bound pennant. And it's on the Yangtze River. The water here is a muddy color. You can see Chinese junks in the foreground. That's a scene painting from China. This final one here is the flagship of the 7th Fleet, second flagship. Both of these ships were flagships, the Helena and the St. Paul. This is the St. Paul, and this is the ship that he went over to China on. This is the ship that he came back from China on. So here you have a collection of working drawings and ship portraits to complete the John Gibson family collection. This is quite a wonderful array of paintings. Non-bikini paintings, but all the same, they show the type of paintings that my dad was most famous for. Thank you very much for your attention.